Chapter 48. Ideology. If the Count of Monte Cristo had lived longer in Parisian society, he would have been able to appreciate the full significance of Monsieur de Villefort's gesture towards him. In favour at court, regardless of whether the reigning monarch belonged to the senior or junior branch of the royal family, and whether the government of the day was doctrinaire, liberal or conservative, considered able by all, as people usually are when they have never suffered a political reverse, hated by many but eagerly protected by a few, though not loved by anyone, Monsieur de Villefort occupied a high position in the judiciary, and remained at that height by the same means as a Harlay or a Molé. His salon, though enlivened by a young wife and a daughter from his first marriage who was barely 18 years old, was nonetheless one of those strict Parisian salons which worship tradition and observe the religion of etiquette. Frigid good manners, absolute fidelity to the principles of the government in power, a profound contempt for theory and theoreticians, and a deep hatred of ideologues made up the elements of his public and private life that Monsieur de Villefort exhibited to the world. He was not only a magistrate, he was almost a diplomat. His connection with the old court, about which he always spoke with dignity and deference, gained him the respect of the new regime. He knew so much that not only was he always treated with tact, but was even asked for his advice from time to time. Things might have been different had it been possible to get rid of Monsieur de Villefort, but, like a feudal baron in revolt against his monarch, he occupied an impregnable fortress. This was his post as Crown Prosecutor. He exploited all the advantages of his position, and would have left it only to go into Parliament, thus replacing neutrality with opposition. On the whole, Monsieur de Villefort made and returned few visits. His wife visited on his behalf. This was accepted in society, where it was attributed to the amount and gravity of the lawyer's business, when it was, in reality, deliberate arrogance, an extreme example of aristocratic contempt. In short, the application of the maxim, "Admire yourself and others will admire you," 100 times more useful in our days than the Greek one, "Know thyself," which has now been replaced by the less demanding and more profitable art of knowing others. To his friends, Monsieur de Villefort was a powerful protector. To his enemies, a silent but relentless adversary. To those who were neither, he was the statue of the law made flesh. Haughty in manner, impassive in expression, with eyes that were either dull and lifeless, or insolently penetrating and inquiring, this was the man whom 4 revolutions, neatly stacked one on top of the other, had first elevated, then cemented to his pedestal. Monsieur de Villefort had the reputation of being the least curious and the least trivial-minded man in France. He gave a ball every year, showing his face in it for a mere quarter of an hour, that is to say, 45 minutes less than the time the king spends in his balls. He was never seen at the theatre, at a concert, or in any public place. Sometimes, but rarely, he would play a hand at whist, and on such occasions they were careful to choose players worthy of him, some ambassador or other, an archbishop, a prince, a president, or some dowager duchess. This was the man whose carriage had just drawn up before Monte Cristo's door. The valet announced Monsieur de Villefort at the moment when the Count was bending across a large table and tracing on a map the itinerary of a journey from St. Petersburg to China. The Crown Prosecutor entered with the same heavy, measured tread that he would adopt on entering court. This was indeed the same man, or rather the continuation of the same man, whom we met earlier as a substitute in Marseille. Nature, consistent with its principles, had changed nothing in the course laid down for him. Once slim, he was now thin. Once pale, he was now yellow. His deep-set eyes were hollow, and his gold-rimmed spectacles, resting in the sockets, seemed to be part of the face. Apart from his white tie, the remainder of his dress was entirely black, and this funereal colour was broken only by the fine strip of red ribbon imperceptibly threaded through his buttonhole, like a line of blood painted with a brush. Though he gave no sign of any other emotion in returning his greeting, Monte Cristo examined the magistrate with visible curiosity. The other man, habitually cautious, and above all incredulous where fashionable marvels were concerned, was more inclined to see in the noble foreigner, as people had already started to call Monte Cristo, some knight of industry who had come to expand into new realms, or an outlaw creeping back into society, than a prince of the Holy See, or a sultan of the 1,001 Knights. "Monsieur," he said with that hectoring tone that advocates advocates adopt for dressing the courtroom, and which they are unable or unwilling to set aside in normal conversation, "the notable service that you performed yesterday for my wife and son has put me under the obligation to thank you. I have therefore come to accomplish this duty and to express my gratitude to you." As he spoke these words, the judge's strict gaze lost none of its usual arrogance. He had articulated the words in his public prosecutor's voice, with the inflexible stiffness of the neck and shoulders that, as we have already mentioned, made his flatterers describe him as the living statue of the law. "Monsieur," the Count replied in a voice of icy coldness, "I am very happy at having been able to preserve a son for his mother, for they say that the feeling of maternal love is the holiest of all, and my enjoyment of this happiness released you, monsieur, from the necessity of filling a duty, the accomplishment of which undoubtedly flatters me, knowing as I do that Monsieur de Villefort is not prodigal with the honour that he does me, but which, precious though it may be, is less valuable to me than my sense of inner satisfaction." Villefort was astonished by this unexpected sally, and winced like a soldier feeling a sword thrust beneath his armour. A scornful curl of his lip showed that he did not henceforth consider Monte Cristo a very civil gentleman. He looked around for something on which to anchor the lapsed conversation, which seemed to have broken apart as it lapsed, and saw the map that Monte Cristo had been studying when he entered. "Do you take an interest in geography, monsieur?" he asked. "It is a rich field of study, especially for someone like yourself, whom, we are assured, has seen many countries as are marked in the atlas." "Yes, monsieur," the Count replied. "I have tried to subject the human race in general to the same analysis you daily apply to the exceptions, that is to say, a physiological one. I considered that it would eventually be easier to move from the whole to the part than from part to whole. There is an axiom in algebra that requires us to proceed from the known to the unknown, and not the contrary. But sit down, I beg you, monsieur." Monte Cristo directed the Crown Prosecutor to a chair so positioned that he had to take the trouble to bring it forward himself, while the Count needed only to sit back in the one on which he had been kneeling when the prosecutor entered. In this way, the Count found himself half turned towards his visitor, with his back to the window and his elbow leaning on the map which, for the time being, was the object of their conversation. A conversation which was taking, as it had done with Morcerf and Danglars, a turn that was analogous, if not to the situation, at least to the persons involved. "I see you are a philosopher," said Villefort, after a momentary silence in which he had been gathering strength like a wrestler meeting a powerful opponent. "Well, monsieur, I do declare, if like you I had nothing to do, I should look for a less melancholy pastime." "Very true, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "Mankind is an ugly worm when you look at it through a solar microscope. But I think you said I have nothing to do. Now, monsieur, I ask you, do you imagine you have anything to do? Or, to put it more clearly, do you believe that what you do deserves to be called something?" Vifor's amazement was only increased by this second blow smartly delivered by this strange adversary. It was a long time since the judge had heard anyone deliver such a powerful paradox, or, more precisely, this was the first time he had heard it. He struggled to find a reply. Monsieur, you are a foreigner, and, as I believe you admit yourself, part of your life has been spent in the East, so you may not know the prudence and formality that here surrounds judicial proceedings, which are so expeditiously dealt with in the East. Very true, monsieur, very true. The pede claudo of antiquity. I know all that because my particular study in every country has been justice, assessing the criminal proceedings of every nation against natural justice. And, monsieur, I have to tell you that the law of primitive peoples, that is to say, an eye for an eye, seems to me, in the end, closest to God's will. If such a law were to be adopted, the prosecutor said, it would greatly simplify our system of laws, and the result would be that our judges, as you said a moment ago, would not have very much to do. It may happen, said Monte Cristo. You know that all human inventions progress from the complex to the simple, and that perfection is always simplicity. In the meantime, said the judge, we have our laws, with their contradictory provisions, some reflecting the usages of the Gauls, others the laws of the Romans, still others the customs of the Franks. You must admit that a knowledge of all those laws can only be had by years of toil, so one must study long and hard to acquire the knowledge, and have a good brain, once it has been acquired, not to forget it. I quite agree, monsieur, but everything that you know, with respect to the French legal system, I know, not only with respect to that, but also to the laws of every country. The laws of the English, the Turks, the Japanese, and the Hindus are as familiar to me as those of the French. So I was right to say that relatively, you know that everything is relative, monsieur, relative to all that I have done, you have very little to do, and relative to what I have learned, you still have very much to learn. To what end did you learn all this? Villefort asked in astonishment. Monte Cristo smiled. Very well, monsieur, he said. I can see that, despite your reputation as a superior being, you see everything from the vulgar and material point of view of society, beginning and ending with man, that is to say, the most restricted and narrow point of view that human intelligence can adopt. I beg you to explain yourself, monsieur, said Villefort, more and more astonished. I don't entirely follow. What I am saying, monsieur, is that your eyes are fixed on the social organization of nations, which means that you only see the mechanism and not the sublime worker who operates it. I am saying that you only recognize in front of you and around you those office holders whose accreditation has been signed by a minister or by the king, and that your short-sightedness leads you to ignore those men whom God has set above office holders, ministers, and kings, by giving them a mission to pursue instead of a position to fill. This weakness is inherent in humans, with their feeble and inadequate organs. Tobias mistook the angel who had just restored his sight for an ordinary young man. The nations mistook Attila, who would annihilate them, for a conqueror like other conquerors. It was necessary for both to reveal their celestial missions for them to be recognized. For one to say, I am the angel of the Lord, and the other, I am the hammer of God, for their divine essence to be revealed. Does this mean, Villefort said, increasingly amazed and thinking he must be speaking to a visionary or a madman, that you consider yourself to be like one of these extraordinary beings you have just mentioned? Why not? Monte Cristo asked coldly. Please forgive me, monsieur, Villefort continued in bewilderment. If, when I called on you, I was not aware that I was to be introduced to a man whose understanding and mind extend so far beyond the ordinary knowledge and usual cast of thought of mankind. It is not common among us, unfortunate victims as we are of the corrupting effects of civilization, for gentlemen who, like yourself, possess a vast fortune. At least that is what I am told, but please do not think that I am prying, only repeating. As I say, it is not customary for those who enjoy the privilege of wealth to waste their time in social speculation and philosophical dreams, which are rather designed to console those whom fate has deprived of the goods of the earth. Well, well, monsieur, the Count replied. Have you reached your present eminent position without admitting that there may be exceptions, or even without encountering any? Do you never exercise your mind, which must surely require both subtlety and assurance, in trying to guess in an instant what kind of man you have before you? Should a jurist not the best applier of the law or the cleverest interpreter of legal quibbles, but a steel probe for the testing of hearts, and a touchstone against which to assay the gold that every soul contains in greater or lesser amounts? Monsieur, said Villefort, I have to admit, I am bewildered. On my word, I have never heard anyone speak as you do. That is because you have constantly remained enclosed in the realm of general conditions, never daring to rise up on beating wings into the higher spheres that God has peopled with invisible and exceptional beings. Are you saying that such spheres exist, and that these exceptional invisible beings mingle among us? Why not? Do you see the air that you breathe, without which you could not live? So we cannot see these beings of whom you speak. Indeed we can. We can see them when God permits them to take material form. You touch them, you rub elbows with them, you speak to them, and they answer you. Ah, Villefort said with a smile, I must confess that I should like to be told when one of these beings was in contact with me. You have your wish, monsieur. You were told a moment ago, and I am telling you again. You mean that you... Yes, monsieur. I am one of those exceptional beings, and I believe that, before today, no man has found himself in a position similar to my own. The kingdoms of kings are confined either by mountains or rivers, or by a change in customs, or by a difference of language. But my kingdom is as great as the world, because I am neither Italian, nor French, nor Hindu, nor American, nor a Spaniard. I am a cosmopolitan. No country can claim to be my birthplace. God alone knows in what region I shall die. I adopt every custom, I speak every tongue. You think I am French, is that not so? Because I speak French as fluently and as perfectly as you do. Well now, Ali, my Nubian, thinks me an Arab. Bertuccio, my steward, takes me for a Roman. Haydee, my slave, believes I am Greek. In this way, you see, being of no country, asking for the protection of no government, and acknowledging no man as my brother, I am not restrained or hampered by a single one of the scruples that tie the hands of the powerful, or the obstacles that block the path of the weak. I have only 2 enemies. I shall not say 2 conquerors, because with persistence I can make them bow to my will. They are distance and time. The third and most awful is my condition as a mortal man. Only that can halt me on the path I have chosen before I have reached my appointed goal. Everything else is planned for. I have foreseen all those things that men call the vagaries of fate, ruin, change, and chance. If some of them might injure me, none could defeat me. Unless I die, I shall always be what I am. This is why I am telling you things that you have never heard, even from the mouths of kings, because kings need you, and other men fear you. Who does not say to himself, in a society as ridiculously arranged as our own, Perhaps one day I shall come up against the Crown Prosecutor. But, monsieur, you too might say that that yourself, because as long as you live in France, you are automatically subject to French law. I know that, Monte Cristo replied, but when I have to go to a country, I begin by studying, by methods peculiar to me, all those persons from whom I may have something to hope or to fear. I get to know them quite well, perhaps even better than they know themselves. The result of this is that the Crown Prosecutor with whom I had to deal, whoever he might be, would certainly be more put out by it than I would be myself. By which you mean, Villefort said hesitantly, that, in your view, human nature being weak, every man has committed some error or other? Some error, or crime, Monte Cristo replied casually. And that you alone, among these men whom, as you yourself said, you do not recognize as your brothers, Villefort's voice sounded slightly strained, you alone are perfect. Not perfect, the Count replied, just impenetrable. But let us change the subject, monsieur, if this one displeases you. I am no more threatened by your justice than you are by my second sight. No, Villefort said quickly, doubtless afraid that he might appear to be abandoning the field. So certainly not. With your brilliant and almost sublime conversation, you have elevated me above ordinary matters. We were no longer merely chatting, but discoursing. Well, now, you know theologians lecturing at the Sorbonne or philosophers in their disputations must sometimes tell one another painful truths. Imagine that we were debating social theology or theological philosophy, and I would say this, brutal though it is, brother, you are giving in to pride. You are above other men, but above you is God. Above everything, monsieur, Monte Cristo replied, in a voice of such deep emotion that Villefort shuddered involuntarily. I have my pride for men, those serpents always ready to rise up against everyone who overtakes them without crushing them beneath his foot. But I lay down that pride before God, who brought me out of nothingness to make me what I am. In that case, monsieur le comte, I admire you, Villefort said, for the first time in this strange dialogue addressing this foreigner, whom he had until then called simply monsieur by his aristocratic title. Yes, I say, if you really are strong, if you are really a superior being, really holy or impenetrable, you are quite right. The two amount virtually to the same thing. Then revel in your magnificence. That is the law of domination. But do you have some kind of ambition? Yes, I do have one. What is it? Like every other man, at least once in his life, I too have been carried up by Satan to the highest mountain on earth. Once there, he showed me the whole world, and, as he did to Christ, said to me, Now, Son of Man, what do you want if you are to worship me? So I thought for a long time, because in reality a terrible ambition had been long devouring my soul. Then I answered him, Listen, I have always heard speak of Providence, yet I have never seen her or anything that resembles her, which makes me think that she does not exist. I want to be Providence, because the thing that I know which is finest, greatest, and most sublime in the world is to reward and to punish. But Satan bowed his head and sighed. You are wrong, he said. Providence does exist, but you cannot see her, because as the daughter of God she is invisible like her father. You have seen nothing that resembles her because she proceeds by hidden means and walks down dark paths. All that I can do for you is to make you one of the agents of this Providence. The deal was concluded. I shall perhaps lose my soul, Monte Cristo continued, but what matter? If the deal had to be struck over again, I should do it. Villefort looked at him with sublime amazement. "Do you have any relatives, Count?" he asked. "None, monsieur. I am alone in the world." "So much the worse." "Why?" said Monte Cristo. "Because you might have a spectacle capable of breaking your pride. You fear nothing but death, I think you said." "I did not say that I feared it. I said that it alone could prevent me." "And old age?" "My mission will be accomplished before I am old." "And madness?" "Once I did almost become mad. And you know the saying, non bis in idem. It is an axiom of the criminal law, so it falls within your province. "There are other things to fear, monsieur," Villefort said, "apart from death, old age, and madness. For example, apoplexy, that lightning bolt which strikes you down without destroying you, yet after which all is finished. You are still yourself, but you are no longer yourself. From a near angel like Ariel, you have become a dull mass, which, like Caliban, is close to the beasts. As I said, in human language, this is quite simply called an apoplexy, or stroke." "Count, I beg you to come and finish this conversation at my house one day when you feel like meeting an opponent able to understand you and eager to refute what you say, and I shall show you my father, Monsieur Nortier de Villefort, one of the most fiery Jacobins of the French Revolution, which means the most splendid daring put to the service of the most rigorous organization, a man who may not, like you, have seen all the kingdoms on earth, but who helped to overthrow one of the most powerful. A man who did not, like you, claim to be one of the envoys of God, but of the Supreme Being, not of Providence, but of Fate. Well, monsieur, the rupture of a blood vessel in the brain put an end to all that. Not in a day, not in an hour, but in a second. One day he was Monsieur Nortier, former Jacobin, former senator, former Carbonaro, who scorned the guillotine, the cannon, and the dagger. Monsieur Nortier, manipulator of revolutions. Monsieur Nortier, for whom France was only a vast chessboard from which pawns, castles, knights, and queens were to vanish when the king was mated. The next day, this redoubtable Monsieur Nortier had become poor Monsieur Nortier, a paralyzed old man, at the mercy of the weakest being in his household, his granddaughter Valentine. In short, a silent, icy corpse who only lives without suffering to allow time for the flesh to progress easily to total decomposition. "Alas, monsieur," Monte Cristo replied, "this spectacle is not unknown to my eyes or to my thoughts. I have some training in medicine, and, like my colleagues, I have more than once sought the soul in matter, living and dead, and, like Providence, it remained invisible to my eyes, though present in my heart. 100 writers, from Socrates onwards, or Seneca, St. Augustine, or Gall, have made the same remark as you, whether in prose or in verse. Yet I can understand that the sufferings of a father can accomplish great changes in the mind of his son. Since you are good enough to invite me, monsieur, I shall come and observe this sad spectacle, which must bring great sorrow to your house, and will incite me to humility." "The household would indeed be sad, were it not that God has given me ample compensation. To counterbalance the old man who is thus delayed in his descent towards the grave, there are 2 whose lives have just begun. Valentine, daughter of my first marriage to Mademoiselle de Saint-Marin, and Edouard, the son whose life you saved." "What do you conclude from this compensation?" Monte Cristo asked. "I conclude that my father, led astray by his passions, committed some of those sins that fall within the sphere of divine rather than human justice, and that God, wishing to punish only one person, struck him down alone." Monte Cristo had a smile on his lips, but he gave a roar in the depth of his heart that would have put Villefort to flight could he have heard it. "Farewell, monsieur," said the judge, who had risen to his feet some time ago and was standing as he spoke. "I must leave you, taking away an esteem for you that I hope you will appreciate when you know me better, for I am not an insignificant person, far from it. In any case, you have made a friend for life in Madame de Villefort." The Count bowed and accompanied Villefort only to the door of his study. The judge was conducted from there on to his carriage by 2 lackeys, who, on a sign from their master, had rushed to open the door for him. Then, when the king's prosecutor had gone, Monte Cristo forced himself to smile, despite the weight on his soul, and said, "Come, come, enough of poison. Now that my heart is full of it, let us go and find the antidote." He struck the bell, and when Ali appeared, told him, "I am going up to Madame. Have my carriage ready in half an hour." Chapter 49. Haydee. The reader will remember the new, or rather the old, acquaintances of the Count of Monte Cristo living in the Rue Meslay, Maximilien, Julie, and Emmanuel. Anticipation of the pleasure of this visit, of those few happy moments, and of this celestial light breaking through into the hell which he had chosen to inhabit, had spread a look of utter serenity across the Count's face as soon as Villefort was out of sight, and Ali, who had hurried to answer the ring of the bell, seeing his face radiant with such unaccustomed joy, had tiptoed out, holding his breath, as if to avoid scaring away the happy thoughts that he could see fluttering around his master. It was midday. The Count had put aside a time to go and see Haydee. It appeared as though joy could not penetrate all at once into a soul so deeply wounded, but that it had to prepare itself for tender feelings, as the souls of others need to be prepared for violent ones. The young Greek woman lived, as we have said, in a suite entirely separate from that of the Count. It was completely furnished in the Oriental manner, that is to say, the floors were covered in thick Turkish carpets, brocade hangings were spread across the walls, and in each room a broad divan ran all the way around the room, piled with cushions which those using them could arrange as they wished. Haydee had 3 French maids and a Greek one. The 3 Frenchwomen remained in an outer room, ready to answer the sound of a little gold bell and obey the orders of the Romaic slave girl, who knew enough French to pass on her mistress's wishes to the 3 maids, who had been instructed by Monte Cristo to show him the same consideration towards Haydee as they would to a queen. The young woman herself was in the most distant room in her suite, that is to say, a sort of round boudoir, lit only from above, into which daylight only penetrated through panes of pink glass. She was lying down on blue satin cushions trimmed with gold, half leaning backwards across the divan, her head framed in the soft curve of her right arm, while the left hand held to her lips a coral mouthpiece inserted into the flexible pipe of a hookah, from which her gentle breath drew the smoke, obliging it to pass through benzoin water so that none would arrive unperfumed to her mouth. Her pose, quite natural for a woman of the East, might perhaps in a Frenchwoman have suggested slightly affected coquetry. As for her dress, it was that of a woman of Epirus, white satin trousers embroidered with pink flowers, displaying a child's feet which seemed carved out of Parian marble, except that they were toying with 2 tiny sandals studded with gold thread and pearls, and with curled toes. A blue and white striped jacket with wide slit sleeves, gold buttonholes and pearl buttons, and finally a sort of bodice, low cut across the heart, leaving the neck and upper part of the bosom bare, and buttoned across the breasts with 3 diamond buttons. The bottom part of this bodice and the top part of the trousers were concealed by one of those brightly coloured belts with long silken fringes that are so much admired by our elegant Parisian women. On her head she wore a little skull cap, also in gold, studded with pearls, tipped to one side, and over this cap, on the side towards which it was leaning, a lovely purple-coloured rose emerged from hair so black that it seemed blue. The beauty of her face was Grecian beauty in the full perfection of the type, with luscious black eyes, straight nose, coral lips, and pearl-white teeth. In addition, this charming whole was crowned with a flower of youth in all its brilliance and sweetness. Haydee would have been around 19 or 20 years old. Monte Cristo called the Greek maid and had her ask Haydee's permission for him to go into her. In reply, Haydee merely gestured to her maid to lift up the tapestry hanging over the door, the square outline of which framed the young woman on the divan like a delightful painting. Monte Cristo came into the room. Haydee rose on the elbow nearest to the hookah and offered the Count her hand, greeting him with a smile and asking, in the resonant tongue of the daughters of Sparta and Athens, "Why do you ask my permission to come in? Are you not my master? Am I not your slave?" Monte Cristo also smiled and said, "You know, Haydee—" "Why do you not say tu to me as usual?" the young woman interrupted. "Have I done something wrong? In that case I must be punished, but don't say vous to me." "Haydee," the Count said, reverting to the familiar form of address, "you know that we are in France, and that, consequently, you are free." "Free to do what?" "Free to leave me." "To leave you? Why should I leave you?" "How do I know? We are going to meet people. I don't want to meet anyone. And among the handsome young men whom you will meet, you may find one whom you like. I would not be so unjust as to—" "I have never seen any man more handsome than you, or loved any man except my father and you." "Poor child," said Monte Cristo, "that is because you have only ever spoken to your father and to me." "What need have I to speak to anyone else? My father called me my sweet, and you call me my love, and you both call me my child." "Do you remember your father, Haydee?" The girl smiled and put her hand on her eyes and her heart. "He is here and here," she said. "And where am I?" Monte Cristo asked with a smile. "You are everywhere." He took Haydee's hand to kiss it, but the innocent girl drew it back and offered him her forehead. "Now, Haydee," he said, "you know that you are free, that you are your own mistress, that you are queen. You can keep your native costume or change it as you wish. You can stay here whenever you like and go out when you want to go out. There will always be a carriage harnessed and ready for you. Ali and Myrto will accompany you everywhere and be at your orders. I ask only one thing. Tell me. Keep the secret of your birth, and do not say a word about your past. At no time must you give the name of your illustrious father or that of your poor mother." "My lord, I have already told you. I shall not meet anyone." "Listen to me, Haydee. This oriental style of seclusion may not be possible in Paris. Carry on learning about life in these northern countries just as you did Rome, Florence, Milan, and Madrid. It will always be useful to you, whether you continue to live here or you return to the East." The girl looked at the Count with her wide, moist eyes and asked, If we return to the East, you must surely mean, my lord." "Yes, child," said Monte Cristo. "You know very well that it will never be I who will leave you. It is not the tree that forsakes the flower, but the flower that forsakes the tree." "And I shall never leave you, my lord," said Haydee, "for I am sure that I could not live without you." "Poor child, in 10 years I shall be old, and in 10 years you will still be young." "My father had a long white beard, but that did not stop me loving him. My father was 60 years old, and he seemed to me more beautiful than any of the young men I saw." "But tell me, do you think you could get used to living here?" "Shall I see you?" "Every day." "So, my lord, why are you asking me?" "I am afraid you may be bored." "No, lord, for in the morning I shall be thinking that you will come, and in the evening I shall recall your visit. In any case, when I am alone I have marvellous memories. I see huge landscapes and vast horizons, with Pindus and Olympus in the distance. Then I have in my heart 3 feelings with which one can never be bored: sadness, love, and gratitude. You are a worthy daughter of Epirus, Haydee, graceful, poetic. One can see that you are descended from that family of goddesses to which your country gave birth. So have no fear, my child. I shall ensure that your youth will not be wasted. For, if you love me as though I were your father, I love you as my child." "You are mistaken, lord. I did not love my father as I love you. My love for you is a different kind of love. My father is dead, and I am alive. While if you were to die, I should die also." The Count held out his hand to the young woman with a smile of deep tenderness, and she, as usual, kissed it. In this way, prepared for the interview that he was about to have with Morel and his family, the Count left, murmuring these verses from Pindar: "Youth is a flower of which love is the fruit. Happy the vintager who picks it after watching it slowly mature." As he had ordered, the carriage was ready. He stepped into it, and the horses, as always, set off at a gallop. And I think there is where I should take a break. That felt icky. Why is it so that, yeah, I mean, I don't know, there are so many, there are so many moments in classic literature where just, like, my child, calling someone you have romantic intentions towards my child, just, nah. Ugh. And yeah, like, I think Monte Cristo's like late 40s, I think, and she's like 19, just like, and a slave. It's just Stockholm syndrome seems to crop up here. Anyway, I will leave you all to ruminate on that, and take a break. So go do break-related things, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. And we're back. That's weird. I don't know why the break music's changed. I've literally changed nothing about... That's weird. That's very strange. I don't know why I did that. Oh well, I will sort that out. And also, yes, hello Diana. Lovely to see you. Thank you for dropping by. It's a long story. it's a big old book. Basically, short version, Dantes, aka so Dante's main character got falsely denounced as a Bonapartist. This is in sort of revolutionary France, and got sent to prison for many years. Whilst he was in prison, he got chummy with a priest, I think, abbé, which is sort of a priest, I guess, who told him where to find some sort of long buried treasure, and it was on the island of Monte Cristo. Dantes then went to the island, found the treasure, and decided to call himself the Count of Monte Cristo. This is when he escaped from prison eventually. So now he's currently like a billionaire, and is calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and is basically just running around trying to have his vengeance on all the people who sort of did him dirty by putting him in prison, and also doing good things to the people who were nice to him before that. So yeah, if that's a very, very fast version. There are quite a few characters and things. But yeah, we don't really like the Count of Monte Cristo anymore. He seems like a bit of a bastard. Yeah, bit racist as well, sexist. Yeah. Not the best protagonist, but there we go. Yeah, he is. He is. Yeah. Doesn't really have very many redeeming qualities. So extremely punchable. Yes, I'm surprised no one's tried. He's getting revenge, yay, but also being quite the arse while doing it, boo. Precisely. Yes. I mean, the people who put him in prison in the first place weren't great. I'm literally sent by gods. Yes, well, someone has already, like, one of the other characters has kind of is wondering if he's a vampire. I don't think he is. I don't think there's any supernaturalness in this. But yeah, people sort of think he's this incredible supernatural being because he, like, doesn't seem to need sleep and seems to know everything. So yeah, so he's currently staying in Paris, and apparently has a slave girl. Yeah, it's all good, fine. Dracula's weren't invented in brand. Yeah. I will stop. What a Mary Sue. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we should look up Dumas and see what Dumas thought of himself. Oh dear. But anyway, we shall continue. As the book, oh my god, the book is falling apart at this point. There's like a middle section of pages that apparently don't want to be attached to anything, so if they start dropping off the desks, then that is why. But we shall continue. Yeah, Dumas sorted out. Yeah. Stop it. Okay. Chapter 50. The Morels. In a few minutes, the Count reached number 7, Rue Meslay. It was a cheerful white house with a front garden with 2 small banks full of quite lovely flowers. The Count recognised the concierge who came to open the gate to him. It was old Coquelet. But the latter, as you may recall, had only one eye, and even this eye had considerably weakened over the past 9 years, and so he did not recognise the Count. To reach the front door, carriages had to drive round a little fountain of water set in the middle of a rocky pool. This ostentation had excited much jealousy in the district, and accounted for the house being called Little Versailles. The pool, needless to say, was full of red and yellow fish. The house had a basement with kitchens and cellars, above which, apart from the ground floor, there were 2 full stories and attics. The young people had bought it with its appurtenances, a huge workshop, 2 lodges in the garden, and the garden itself. On first visiting the property, Emmanuel had seen that this arrangement might be the opportunity for a little speculative venture. He had set aside the house and half the garden for himself and had drawn a line across it. That is to say, he built a wall between himself and the workshops, which he leased out with the outbuildings and the part of the garden surrounding them. In this way, he had a home for quite a modest sum, and was as tightly enclosed in his own home as the most fastidious householder of a private mansion on the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The dining-room was in oak, the drawing-room in walnut and blue velvet, and the bedroom in lemonwood and green damask. In addition, there was a study for Emmanuel, who did not study, and a music-room for Julie, who did not play any music. The second floor was entirely devoted to Maximilien. It was the precise replica of his sister's apartment, except that the dining-room had been converted into a billiard-room, where he brought his friends. He was himself overseeing the grooming of his horse and smoking a cigar at the entrance to the garden when the Count's carriage drew up in front of the gate. As we said, Coquelet opened the gate, and Baptistin, leaping down from his seat, asked if Monsieur and Madame Herbault and Monsieur Maximilien Morel would receive the Count of Monte Cristo. "The Count of Monte Cristo?" Morel exclaimed, casting aside his cigar and running down to meet the visitor. "I should say we will receive the Count of Monte Cristo. Thank you 100 times, Count, for not forgetting your promise." The young officer shook the Count's hand so warmly that he could not mistake the sincerity of the gesture, and understood that he had been awaited with impatience, to be greeted with enthusiasm. "Come, come," said Maximilien. "I want to introduce you myself. A man like you should not be announced by a servant. My sister is in her garden, pruning the roses. My brother is reading his 2 newspapers, the Presse and the Débat, a few feet away from her, because wherever you see Madame Herbol, you have only to search in radius 4 yards around her to find Monsieur Emmanuel, and reciprocally, as they say at the École Polytechnique." Their footsteps attracted the attention of a young woman of between 20 and 25, wearing a silk robe, who was concentrating on pruning a reddish-brown rosebush. This was little Julie. As the emissary of the firm of Thomson and French had predicted, she was now Madame Emmanuelle Herbol. She looked up and gave a cry on seeing the stranger. Maximilien began to laugh. "Don't worry, sister," he said. "The Count has only been in Paris for 2 or 3 days, but he already knows what to expect from a lady with a private income in the Marais. If he doesn't, you will show him." "Oh, monsieur," said Julie, "this is treachery on the part of my brother, bringing you here without the slightest regard for how his sister looks. Penelon, Penelon!" An old man who was digging a bed of Bengal roses stuck his spade in the ground and came over, cap in hand, doing his best to hide a quid of tobacco which he had temporarily pushed to the back of his cheek. His hair was still thick, though streaked with a few white strands, while his sunburnt complexion and his sharp, fearless eyes betrayed the old sailor, tanned by the equatorial sun and weathered in the storm. "I think you called me, Mademoiselle Julie. Here I am." Penelon still called his boss's daughter Mademoiselle Julie, never having managed to accustom himself to call her Madame Herbol. "Penelon," Julie said, "go and inform Monsieur Emmanuel of our visitor's welcome arrival, while Monsieur Maximilien is showing the Count into the drawing-room." Then, turning to Monte Cristo, she added, "You will permit me to retire for a moment, I hope." And, without waiting for the Count's consent, she set off briskly behind a bank of flowers, taking a side path into the house. "Oh, now, my dear Monsieur Morel," Monte Cristo said, "it pains me to see that I am turning your whole house upside down." "Come, come," Maximilien said, laughing. "Look, there is the husband, who is also changing his jacket for a frock-coat. You are known in the Rue Meslay, and, I beg you to believe me, your arrival was announced." "It appears to me that you have a happy family here," said the Count, following his own train of thought. "Yes, indeed, you may be assured of that. What do you expect? They have all that they need to be happy. They are young, merry, in love, and with their income of 25,000 livres a year, even though they have rubbed shoulders with vast fortunes, they think themselves as wealthy as Rothschild. Yet it is a small sum, 25,000 livres a year," said Monte Cristo, with such softness that it found a path to the depths of Maximilien's heart like the voice of a loving father. "But these young people will not stop there. They will be millionaires in their turn. Is your brother-in-law a lawyer? A doctor?" "He was a merchant, Count. He took over my poor father's business. Monsieur Morel died, leaving 500,000 francs. There were only 2 children, so I had one half and my sister the other. Her husband, who had married her with no other fortune except his unflinching honesty, his outstanding intelligence, and his spotless reputation, wanted to match his wife's patrimony. He worked until he had saved 250,000 francs. 6 years were enough. I assure you, Count, it was touching to see these 2 young people, so hard-working, so devoted to one another, destined by their talents to enjoy the greatest good fortune, desirous of changing nothing in the customary methods of the family firm. They took 6 years to accomplish what an innovator could have done in 2 or 3, and all Marseille resounded with praise for such brave self-denial. Finally, one day Emmanuel came to his wife, who had just made the final payment. Julie, he told her, here is the last bundle of 100 francs that Coquelet has just given me, completing the 250,000 francs that we set as the limit to our profits. Will you be content with this small sum on which we shall have henceforth to survive? Listen, the firm has a turnover of 1 million a year and can bring in a profit of 40,000 francs. If we wish, we can sell our clientele within the hour for 300,000 francs. Here is a letter from Monsieur de Launay offering us that in exchange for our assets, which he wants to merge with his own. Consider what we should do. My dear, my sister answered, the firm of Morel can only be run by a Morel. Is it not worth 300,000 francs to save our father's name for ever from the mischances of fortune? I had reached the same conclusion, Emmanuel said, but I wanted to know your opinion. Now you know it, my dear. All our accounts are up to date, all our bills are paid. We can draw a line under the balance sheet for this fortnight and put up the shutters. Let's do it. And they did it, immediately. It was 3 o'clock. At 1:15, a customer came in to insure 2 ships for a voyage, which would have meant a clear profit of 15,000 francs. Monsieur, Emmanuel said, please be so good as to take your business to our colleague, Monsieur de Launay. We are no longer in business. Since when? The customer asked in amazement. Since a quarter of an hour ago. And that, monsieur, Maximilien continued with a smile, is how my sister and my brother-in-law come to have an income of only 25,000 livres. Maximilien had barely finished his story. The Count's heart had swelled progressively as it proceeded, when Emmanuel reappeared, properly fitted out with a hat and frock coat. He gave a bow that acknowledged the visitor's importance. Then, after showing the Count round the little flower garden, he led him back to the house. The drawing-room was already redolent of the flowers that burst out of a huge wicker-handled Japanese vase. Julie, tidily dressed and her hair prettily done, she had achieved this tour de force in 10 minutes, was waiting to receive the Count as he came in. Birds could be heard singing in a nearby aviary, and the blue velvet curtains were bordered with clusters of laburnum and pink acacia branches. Everything in this charming little retreat spoke of tranquillity, from the song of the birds to the smile of the owners. From the moment he entered the house, the Count had been filled with this happiness. He remained silent and meditative, forgetting that the others were waiting for him to resume the conversation which had halted after the first exchange of greetings. Finally, becoming aware of this silence, which was on the point of becoming embarrassing, and forcing himself out of his reverie, he said, "Madame, forgive me. Accustomed as you are to the atmosphere of happiness that I find here, my feelings must astonish you. But for me, the sight of contentment on a human face is so novel that I cannot resist looking at you and your husband." "We are indeed very happy, monsieur," Julie replied. "But we had to suffer for a long time, and few people have bought their happiness as dearly as we have." The Count's face expressed his curiosity. "Oh, there's a whole family history here, as Chateau Renard told you the other day," Maximilien replied. "You, Monsieur le Comte, accustomed as you are to notorious misfortunes and illustrious joys, will find little to interest you in this domestic scene. Yet, as Julie says, we have suffered much pain, even though it was confined to a small stage." "And did God give you consolation for your sufferings, as he does for all of us?" Monte Cristo asked. "Yes, Count," Julie said. "We can say that indeed, for he did something for us that he only does for the chosen few. He sent us one of his angels." The Count blushed, and he coughed, to give himself an excuse to put a handkerchief to his mouth and hide the evidence of his feelings. "Those who are born with a silver spoon," Emmanuel said, "those who have never needed anything, do not understand what happiness is, any more than those who do not know the blessing of a clear sky and who have never entrusted their lives to 4 planks tossing on a raging sea." Monte Cristo got up and started to pace up and down the room, but said nothing, because his voice would have betrayed his emotion. You are smiling at the splendour of our apartments, Count, said Maximilien, watching him. No, not at all, replied Monte Cristo, pale, holding one hand across his chest to repress the beating of his heart, and pointing with the other to a crystal globe under which a silk purse was carefully preserved, lying on a black velvet cushion. I was just wondering on what was the purpose of this purse, which seems to me holds on one side a piece of paper and on the other a rather fine diamond. That, Monsieur le Comte, is the most precious of the family treasures. The diamond is indeed rather fine, the Count replied. Oh, my brother is not referring to the value of the stone, monsieur, though it is estimated at 100,000 francs. He merely wishes to tell you that the objects in this purse are the relics of the angel about whom we spoke a moment ago. I do not understand what you can mean, yet I have no right to question you about it, madame, Monte Cristo said with a bow. Pray forgive me. I did not mean to be inquisitive. What do you mean, inquisitive? Please, Count, allow us the pleasure of this opportunity to talk about it. If we wish to conceal this fine deed and keep secret the story behind this purse, then we should not exhibit it in this way. But we wish, on the contrary, to publish it throughout the world, so that our unknown benefactor might give a sign which could betray his presence to us. Indeed, Monte Cristo exclaimed in a muffled voice. Maximilien lifted the crystal dome and piously kissed the silk purse. Monsieur, he said, this has been touched by the hand of a man who saved my father from death, us from ruin, and our name from ignominy. A man, thanks to whom we, poor children destined for poverty and tears, can today hear people rhapsodize about our happiness and good fortune. This letter, Maximilien took it out of the purse and handed it to the Count, was written by him on a day when my father had taken the most desperate decision, and this diamond was given to my sister by this generous stranger as her dowry. Monte Cristo opened the letter and read it with an indescribable expression of happiness. It was the note that the reader will already know, the one addressed to Julie and signed by Sinbad the sailor. A stranger, you say? So you have never discovered the identity of the man who did this for you? No, monsieur, we have never had the pleasure of shaking his hand. It is not through want of praying God for the opportunity to do so, Maximilien continued, but there was a mysterious purpose behind all this adventure that we cannot yet understand. It was entirely controlled by an invisible hand, powerful as that of an enchanter. Oh, Julie exclaimed, I have not lost all hope that I may one day kiss that hand as I now kiss the purse that it touched. 4 years ago, Penelon was in Trieste. Penelon, Count, is the honest sailor whom you saw with a spade in his hand, and who, once a boatswain, is now a gardener. As I say, Penelon was in Trieste, where he saw an Englishman on the quayside about to embark on a yacht, and recognized the man who came to my father's on June the 5th, 1829, and wrote me that note on September the 5th. He assures me it was the same man, but that he did not dare to speak to him. An Englishman, Monte Cristo said thoughtfully, growing more anxious whenever Julie glanced at him. You say it was an Englishman? Yes, Maximilien replied, an Englishman who presented himself to us as an emissary from the firm of Thomson and French in Rome. That is why you saw me start the other day at Monsieur Morcerf's when you mentioned that Messrs. Thomson and French are your bankers. As we said, this happened in 1829. In heaven's name, monsieur, did you know this Englishman? I thought you also told me that Thomson and French consistently denied having performed this service for you. Yes, they do. So the Englishman might well be a man who, in gratitude to your father for some good deed that even your father had forgotten, used this as a pretext to do him a favour? Even in the circumstances, everything is possible, even a miracle. What was his name? Monte Cristo asked. He left no name, Julie replied, looking very closely at the Count, except the one with which he signed the note, Sinbad the Sailor. Which is evidently not a name, but a pseudonym. Then, as Julie was looking still more attentively at him and was trying to catch something in his voice and place it, the Count continued, "Come now. Was it perhaps a man of about my height? Perhaps a little taller, somewhat slimmer, wearing a high cravat buttoned up, tightly corseted, who always had a pencil in his hand?" You do know him?" Julie cried, her eyes gleaming with joy. "No," the Count replied. "It was just a supposition. I did know a Lord Wilmore who would perform such acts of generosity." "Without revealing himself?" "He was an odd man, who did not believe in gratitude." "In that case," Julie cried in sublime tones, clasping her hands, "what did he believe in, the poor man?" "He certainly did not believe in it at the time when I knew him," Monte Cristo said, moved to the very depths of his being by her soulful voice. "Since then he may perhaps have had some proof that gratitude does exist." "Do you know this man?" Emmanuel asked. "Oh, monsieur, if you do know him," Julie exclaimed, "tell me, please. If you cannot bring him to us, show him to us. Tell us where he is. If we should ever find him, he would surely have to believe that the heart does not forget. Is that not so, Emmanuel? Maximilien?" Monte Cristo felt 2 tears gather in his eyes and paced once more up and down the room. "I beg you, monsieur," said Maximilien, "if you do know anything of this man, please tell us what you know." "Alas," Monte Cristo exclaimed, repressing the emotion in his voice, "if Lord Wilmore is indeed your benefactor, I am very much afraid that you will never find him. I left him 2 or 3 years ago in Palermo, and he was just about to set off for the most fabled shores. Indeed, I gravely doubt if he will ever return." "Oh, monsieur, it is cruel of you to say so," said Julie, horrified, tears springing to her eyes. "Madame," Monte Cristo said gravely, his gaze fixed on the 2 liquid pearls running down her cheeks, "if Lord Wilmore could witness what I have just seen here, he would still love life, because your tears would reconcile him to the human race." And he held out his hand to Julie, who gave him hers, finding herself captivated by the Count's look and the tone of his voice. "But," she said, clasping at one last straw, "this Lord Wilmore, he must have had a country, a family, relatives. In short, he was known. Could we not—" "Don't even try, madame," said the Count. "Do not build some sweet hope on the foundation of a word that slipped from my lips. No, Lord Wilmore is probably not the man you are looking for. He was my friend. I knew all his secrets, and he would have told me that one." "But he said nothing to you?" Julie asked. "Nothing. Not a word that might have suggested—" "Never a word." "Yet his was the name that immediately sprang to your lips." "Oh, you know, in such cases one makes a guess." "Sister, dear sister," said Maximilien, coming to his aid, "the Count is right. Remember what our good father so often told us. It was not an Englishman who did us this great service." Monte Cristo shuddered. "Your father said what, Monsieur Morel?" he asked sharply. "My father saw this act as a miracle. He believed that our benefactor was someone who had come back from the dead." "Oh, monsieur, it was a touching superstition, and, while I did not believe it myself, I certainly had no wish to destroy the belief in his noble heart. How many times did he mutter the name of a dear, dear friend, a friend whom he had lost, and when he was on the point of death, and the prospect of eternity might have given his mind some illumination from beyond the grave, this idea, which until then had been no more than a suspicion, became a certainty. And the last words that he spoke before he died were these: 'Maximilien, It was Edmond Dantès. The colour had been draining from the Count's face as Maximilien spoke, and at these words his face became awful in its pallor. All the blood had rushed to his heart, and he was speechless. He took out his watch as if he had forgotten the time, grasped his hat, brusquely muttered an embarrassed farewell to Madame Herbault, and said, clasping the hands of Emmanuel and Maximilien, "Madame, allow me to come from time to time to pay my compliments to you. I love your house, and I am most grateful to you for your hospitality, because this is the first time for many years that I have been able to forget my troubles." And he left, striding out of the house. "An odd fellow, this Count of Monte Cristo," Emmanuel said. "Yes," Maximilien replied, "but I think he has a good heart, and I am sure that he likes us." "So am I," Julie exclaimed. His voice touched me deeply, and 2 or 3 times I thought that this was not the first time I had heard it. Chapter 51. Pyramus and Thisbe. 2/3 of the way down the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, behind a magnificent private mansion, remarkable even among the many remarkable residences in this rich district, there is a huge garden surrounded by walls as high as ramparts. From here, in springtime, the tufted chestnuts drop their pink and white flowers into 2 fluted stone vases, placed opposite one another on 2 quadrangular pilasters, between which is set an iron gateway from the time of Louis XIII. Despite the splendid geraniums growing in the 2 vases which toss their marbled leaves and purple flowers in the wind, this grandiose entrance has been condemned since the time, and it was some time earlier, when the owners of the mansion confined themselves to possession of the house itself, the tree-lined courtyard opening into the faubourg, and the garden behind the gateway we have mentioned, which formerly gave access to a magnificent vegetable garden, an acre in size, adjoining the property. But the demon of speculation drew a line, in the form of a street, along the side of the vegetable garden. The street, before it even existed except as a line, received a name, thanks to a polished iron plaque, and someone had the idea that the vegetable garden could be sold for buildings along the street, to compete with the major Parisian thoroughfare called the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. However, where speculation is concerned, man proposes and money disposes. The street was baptized and died in its cradle. The purchaser of the vegetable garden, having paid the full amount for it, could not resell at the price he wanted. So, while waiting for a rise in prices that was bound, sooner or later, to more than compensate him for past losses and the capital which he had tied up, he made do with renting the plot to some market gardeners for the sum of 500 francs a year. This was money invested at 0.5%, which is not much nowadays when so many people invested at 50 and still complain that the returns are poor. However, as we said, the garden gate, which used at one time to look over the vegetable garden, has been condemned, and rust is eating into its hinges. Worse still, so that the low-born market gardeners shall not sully the interior of the aristocratic property with their vulgar gaze, a wall of planks has been affixed to the bars of the gate up to a height of 6 feet. Admittedly, these planks are not so tightly juxtaposed as to prevent a furtive glance slipping between them, but the house is a forbidding house, and not afraid of indiscreet eyes. In the vegetable garden, instead of cabbages, carrots, radish, peas, and melons, the only growing things to show that this otherwise abandoned site is still sometimes tended are tall alfalfa plants. A low door, opening onto the proposed line of the street, allows entry to the place, which is surrounded by walls. The tenants have, in the past week, abandoned it because of its barrenness, and now, instead of the previous 0.5%, it is bringing in no percent at all. On the side nearest to the mansion, the chestnut trees which we mentioned crown the wall, though this does not prevent other luxuriantly flowering rivals from insinuating their branches between them in search of air. At a corner where the growth is so thick that the light can hardly penetrate, a wide stone bench and some garden seats mark a meeting place or favourite retreat of an inhabitant of the large house, which can hardly be seen through the protective wall of greenery around this spot, even though it is only 100 yards away. Apart from that, the position of this mysterious shelter could have been dictated by the absence of the sun, giving a permanent chill to the air, on even the hottest summer days, the singing of the birds, and the distance from the house and from the street, that is to say, from bustle and noise. On the evening of one of the warmest days that Paris had so far enjoyed that spring, the stone bench carried a book, a sunshade, a work-basket and a lawn handkerchief, partly embroidered. Not far from the bench, beside the gate, looking through a gap in the planks, was a young woman whose attention was directed towards the deserted vegetable garden which we have just described. Almost at that same moment as she was looking out across it, the little doorway into the sight closed silently, and a young man came through it, tall, energetic, wearing an undyed cotton smock and corduroy cap, though his well-tended moustache, beard and black hair did not harmonise with this lower-class attire. He looked quickly around to ensure that he was not being watched, came through the door, closed it behind him and strode rapidly towards the iron gate. Seeing the man she was expecting, if not necessarily in that dress, the young woman was taken aback and started. But the man, with a sharpness of perception that belongs only to a lover, had already seen through the gaps in the planks the fluttering of her white dress and the long blue belt. He ran across to the gate, and pressing his lips against the opening said, "Don't worry, Valentine, it's me." The girl came back. "Oh, monsieur," she said, "why are you so late today? Do you realise that it will soon be dinner, and that I needed a great deal of diplomacy and a great deal of rapid thinking to get rid of my stepmother, who watches me, my chambermaid, who spies on me, and my brother, who teases me, before I could manage to come down here and work on this embroidery, which, I fear, will not be finished for a long while yet? Then, when you have explained and asked forgiveness for your lateness, you can tell me what is this new style of dress that you have decided to adopt, which almost prevented me from recognising you." "Dear Valentine," said the young man, "you are too far above my love for me to dare speak of it to you. Yet every time that I see you, I need to tell you that I adore you, so that the echo of my own words will gently caress my heart when I am no longer with you. Now, let me thank you for your scolding. It charms me, because it proves that, I dare not say that you were waiting for me, but at least that you thought of me. You wish to know the reason for my late arrival and for my disguise. I shall tell you, and I hope you will forgive them. I have chosen a trade." "A trade? What do you mean, Maximilien? Are we fortunate enough for you to jest about what matters so much to us?" "Heaven forbid that I should jest when my life depends on it," said the young man. "But I have grown tired of being a runner through fields and a climber of walls, and I was seriously worried by the idea you suggested to me the other evening, that your father might one day have me hauled up as a thief, which would be a blow to the honour of the entire French army. Apart from which, I feared people might find it odd for a captain in the Spahis to be constantly hovering around this plot of land, where there is not a single fortress to attack or blockhouse to defend. So I have become a market gardener, and put on the clothing of my profession." "What idiocy is this?" "None at all, but I think the most sensible thing I have done in my life, because it gives us complete security." "Explain what you mean." "Well, I went to find the owner of this plot of land, and since the lease with the old tenants had run out, I took it over from him myself. All this alfalfa that you see is mine, Valentine. Nothing prevents me from building a cabin in the stubble, and from henceforth living 20 yards away from you. Oh, happiness and joy! I can hardly contain myself. Do you think that those two things can be bought, Valentine? Impossible, isn't it? Well, all this happiness and joy, for which I would have given 10 years of my life, are costing me, guess how much? 500 francs a year in quarterly instalments. You see, from now on we have nothing to fear. I am at home here. I can put a ladder against my wall and look over it. I am entitled to tell you that I love you without fearing that the night watch will disturb me, provided your pride is not wounded at hearing this word on the lips of a poor day-labourer dressed in a smock and wearing a cap." Valentine gave a little cry of joyful surprise. Then, as if a jealous cloud had suddenly come between her and the ray of sunshine that had lit up her heart, she remarked sadly, "Alas, Maximilien, now we shall be too free, and our happiness will tempt fate. We shall misuse our freedom, and a false sense of security will destroy us." "Can you say that to me, my dearest? To the man who, since he has known you, has proved every day that he subordinates his own thoughts and his own life to yours? Was it not my happiness that gave you confidence in me? When you told me that some vague instinct had convinced you that you were running a great danger, I devoted myself to serving you, and asked for no reward save the happiness of being able to do so. Since that time, have I given any indication that would make you repent of having chosen me from among all those who would have been happy to die for you? Poor child, you told me that you were engaged to Monsieur d'Épinay, that your father had decided that this match would take place, and that consequently it was certain to do so, since everything that Monsieur de Villefort wants is bound to happen. Well, I stayed in the background, not expecting anything from my own will or yours, but everything from events and from Providence. And yet you love me. You took pity on me, Valentine, and you told me so. Thank you for those sweet words. All I ask is that you should repeat them from time to time, and I shall forget everything else." "This is why you have become so bold, Maximilien. This is why my life is at once very sweet and very unhappy, to the point where I often ask myself which is better for me, the sorrow that I once endured because of my stepmother and her blind preference for her own child, or all the perils of the happiness that I feel when I see you." "Perils?" Maximilien exclaimed. "How can you say such a hard and unjust word? Have you ever seen a more submissive slave than I? Valentine, you permitted me occasionally to speak to you, but forbade me to follow you. I obeyed. Since I discovered the means to break into this plot of land and speak to you through this door, in short, to be so close to you without seeing you, have I ever asked to touch even the hem of your dress through the gate? Tell me, have I ever taken a step towards climbing over the wall, a trivial obstacle to one as young and as strong as I am? Not a single rebuke for your harshness towards me, not a single desire spoken aloud. I have kept my word as scrupulously as a knight of old. At least admit that, so that I may not think you unjust." "It is true," Valentine said, slipping the tip of one of her slender fingers between two planks for Maximilien to kiss it. "It's true, you are a trustworthy friend. But in the end you only acted out of self-interest, my dear, because you know very well that, on the day when the slave becomes too demanding, he must lose everything. You promised me the friendship of a brother. I who have no friends, I who am ignored by my father, I who am persecuted by my stepmother, and who have no other consolation but a motionless, benumbed old man, whose hand cannot press my hand, and who can speak to me only with his eyes, though his heart no doubt beats with some trace of warmth for me. What a bitter irony of fate that I should be the enemy and victim of all those who are stronger than I am, having only a corpse as my supporter and friend. Oh, Maximilien, I say it again, I am truly unfortunate, and you are right to love me for myself and not for you." "Valentine," the young man said, deeply moved, "I cannot say that you are the only person that I love in the world, because I also love my sister and my brother-in-law, but my love for them is tranquil and calm, quite unlike the feeling that I have for you. When I think of you, my blood churns, my chest swells, my heart flows over, but I shall direct all this strength, all this ardour, all this superhuman power to loving you only as long as you tell me to devote them to your service. They say that Monsieur Franz d'Épinay will be away for another year yet. What good fortune might not befall us in a year? What favourable turn might events not take? So let us hope, because it is so good and so sweet to hope. Meanwhile, you, Valentine, you who accuse me of egoism, how have you behaved towards me? Like the beautiful and cold statue of some prudish Venus. In exchange for my devotion, my obedience and my restraint, what have you promised me? Nothing. What have you given me? Very little. You talked of me of Monsieur d'Épinay, your fiancé, and you sigh at the thought that you might one day belong to him. Come, Valentine, is that the only idea on your mind? What? I offer you my life, I give you my soul, I dedicate the slightest beat of my heart to you, and while I am all yours, while I whisper to myself that I should die if I were to lose you, you on your side are not appalled at the very idea of belonging to another man. Oh, Valentine, Valentine, if I was what you are, if I felt myself to be loved as you may be sure that I love you, I should already have put my hand 100 times through the bars of this gate and grasped poor Maximilien, saying, yours alone, Maximilien, and in this world and the next. Valentine made no reply, but the young man heard her sighing and weeping. The effect on him was immediate. "Oh, Valentine, Valentine," he cried, "forget what I said. Something in my words must have upset you." "No," she replied, "you are right. But can you not see that I am a poor creature, abandoned virtually in a stranger's house, because my father is almost a stranger to me, whose will has been broken for 10 years, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, by the iron will of the masters who are set over me? No one can see what I suffer, and I have told no one except you. In appearance, in the eyes of everyone, all is well with me, all is goodness and affection, when in reality all is hostility. The outside world says, Monsieur de Villefort is too serious and strict to be very gentle with his daughter, but at least she has had the good fortune of finding a second mother in Madame de Villefort. Well, the outside world is wrong. My father abandons me with indifference, and my stepmother hates me with an unremitting hatred that is all the more frightful for being hidden beneath an eternal smile. She hates you? You, Valentine? How can anyone hate you? Alas, my friend, Valentine said, I have to admit that her hatred towards me comes from what is almost a natural feeling. She adores her son, my brother Edward. So, while it may seem strange to bring money into the question that we are discussing, I do believe, my dear, that her hatred derives from that. Since she has no wealth on her own side, and I am already rich, thanks to my mother, with a fortune that will even be more than doubled by that of Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Marin, which is due one day to revert to me, well, I think she is envious. Oh, my God, if I could give half that fortune and feel in Monsieur de Villefort's house as a daughter should in the house of her father, I would do it in an instant. Poor Valentine. Yes, I feel like someone bound, and at the same time so weak that it seems to me that my chains support me, and I am afraid to break them. In any case, my father is not the sort of man whose orders can be disregarded with impunity. He is powerful in his opposition to me. He would be powerful against you. He would be the same against the king, protected as he is by an irreproachable past and an almost unassailable position. Oh, Maximilien, I swear it, if I do not struggle, it is because I fear you would be broken as much as I would in the fight. But, Valentine, why despair? Why always paint the future in such sombre hues? Maximilien asked. Because, my friend, I judge it by the past. Come now, while I may not be an outstanding match from the aristocratic point of view, I still belong in many ways to the same world as the one in which you live. The time when there were two nations in France has passed. The leading families of the monarchy have melted into the families of the empire, and the aristocracy of the lance has married the nobility of the cannon. Well, I belong to the latter. I have a fine future in the army. I possess a small but independent fortune. And finally, the memory of my father is venerated in our part of the country as that of one of the most honest merchants who ever lived. I say our part of the country, Valentine, because you almost come from Marseille. Don't mention Marseille to me, Maximilien. The name alone recalls my dear mother, that angel, mourned by everyone, who watched over her daughter during her brief sojourn on earth, and I hope still watches over her during her eternal sojourn in heaven. Oh, if my poor mother were alive, Maximilien, I should have nothing to fear. I should tell her that I love you, and she would protect us. Alas, Valentine, Maximilien said, if she was alive, I should certainly not know you. For as you said, you would be happy if she were alive, and a happy Valentine would have looked down on me in contempt. Oh, my dear friend, now you were being unfair in your turn, Valentine exclaimed. But tell me. What do you want me to tell you? Maximilien asked, seeing that Valentine was hesitating. Tell me, was there ever, at one time in Marseille, some matter of dispute between your father and mine? No, not so far as I know, Maximilien replied, except that your father was an utterly devoted supporter of the Bourbons, and mine was devoted to the Emperor. I assume that was the only bone they ever had to pick between them. Why do you ask? I shall tell you, because you ought to know everything. It was on the day when your nomination as Officer of the Legion of Honour was published in the newspaper. We were all visiting my grandfather, Monsieur Notier, and Monsieur Danglars was there. You know, the banker whose horses nearly killed my mother and my brother 2 days ago. I was reading aloud, from the newspaper to my grandfather, while these gentlemen were talking about Mademoiselle Danglars' marriage. When I got to the paragraph concerning you, which I had already read, because you had told me the good news on the previous day, I was very happy, but also very uneasy at having to speak your name aloud. I should certainly have left it out, were it not that I feared that my silence might be misinterpreted. So I plucked up all my courage and read, Dearest Valentine. Well, as soon as I spoke your name, my father turned around. I was so certain, you see what a silly goose I am, that everyone would be struck by your name, as if by a bolt of lightning, that I thought I saw my father, and even Monsieur Danglars, shudder at the sound of it. But in his case I'm sure it was an illusion. Morel, my father said, wait! And he raised an eyebrow. Would that be one of those Morels of Marseille, one of those Bonapartist fanatics who gave us so much trouble in 1815? Yes, Danglars replied. I even think it may be the son of the former shipowner. Indeed? Said Maximilien. What did your father say? Something dreadful that I dare not repeat. Repeat it anyway, Maximilien said with a smile. Their emperor, he said contemptuously, knew how to put all those fanatics in their place. He called them cannon fodder, and that was the only name they deserved. I am delighted to see that the new government has restored this salutary principle. I should congratulate it on keeping Algeria, if only for that reason, even though the cost is a little excessive. Admittedly, that is rather brutal as a policy, Maximilien said. But, my darling, you have no need to blush at what Monsieur de Villefort said, because my good father was a match for yours in this respect. He said repeatedly, why does the Emperor, who has done so many fine things, not enroll a regiment of judges and lawyers, and put them in the forefront of the battle? So you see, my dear, that the two deserve one another, both in kindness of thought and sweetness of expression. But what did Monsieur Danglars say to this remark by the king's prosecutor? Oh, he started to laugh, with that peculiar sly laugh that he has, which I find savage. Then, a moment later, they got up and left. Only then did I see that something had upset my grandfather. I must tell you, Maximilien, that I am the only person who can tell how he feels, because no one else takes notice of the poor paralysed old man. And I guessed that the conversation might have impressed him, since they had been speaking ill of his emperor, and it appears he was a fanatical Bonapartist. Certainly, said Maximilien. He was one of the leading figures of the imperial era. He was a senator, and whether you realise it or not, Valentine, he was close to all the Bonapartist conspiracies under the Restoration. I have sometimes heard whispers about that, and was surprised by them. A Bonapartist grandfather and a royalist father. Anyway, what do you expect? I turned back to him, and his eyes indicated the paper. "What is it, Papa?" I asked. "Are you pleased?" He nodded. "At what my father has just said?" I asked. He shook his head. "At what Monsieur Danglars said?" Again he shook his head. "So, you are pleased that Monsieur Morel," I did not dare say Maximilien, "has been appointed officer of the Legion of Honour?" He nodded. "Can you believe that, Maximilien? He was pleased that you had been appointed to the Legion of Honour, even though he does not know you. It may perhaps be folly on his part, because people say he is entering a second childhood, but I love him even so." "That's odd," Maximilien meditated. "Your father hates me, while your grandfather... How peculiar these political loves and hatreds are." "Hush!" Valentine suddenly exclaimed. "Hide, quickly, go away, someone's coming." Maximilien grasped a spade and began to dig pitilessly into the alfalfa. "Mademoiselle," cried a voice behind the trees, "Madame de Villefort is looking everywhere for you and asking after you. There is a visitor in the drawing-room." "A visitor?" Valentine said in an anxious voice. "Who is visiting us?" "A great lord, a prince, they say, the Count of Monte Cristo." "I'm coming," Valentine said loudly. On the other side of the gate, the man to whom Valentine's "I'm coming" served as a farewell at the end of every meeting, started on hearing the name of her visitor. "Well, well," Maximilien said to himself, leaning thoughtfully on his spade. "How does the Count of Monte Cristo happen to know Monsieur de Villefort?" Dun, dun, dun! And I think there is where we shall end it, because I think the next chapter is quite a long one. I will just check. Yes, it is.